She stood satisfyingly still in front of 300 wolves, not weeping, not begging, not doing any of the desperate, undignified things his court expected from a woman who had just been publicly severed from the most powerful alpha on the continent. Serafina Voss held her place in the center of the great hall of Ironholt, her hands loose at her sides, her chin level, her breathing so steady it was almost an insult. The firelight carved her shadow long and sharp across the stone floor, and every wolf in that hall held their breath, waiting for her to crumble. She did not crumble. Chaol Draven, Alpha King of the Northern Dominion, stood on the dais above her with his jaw set and his golden eyes flat as hammered coin. He had spoken the words of severance in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, measured, deliberate, final. A rejection forged in public so it could never be questioned or undone. "The bond is refused," he had said. "She is released." 3 words, clean as a blade drawn across a throat. The court had erupted in whispers. Lady Morgaine, his late mother's closest adviser, had allowed herself a thin smile from her seat at the high table, her silver rings catching the firelight as she folded her hands. The noble daughters who had spent months positioning themselves for the Luna's throne exchanged glances sharp as drawn knives. And Serafina, the nobody, the orphan ward of a border pack so small it barely warranted a name on the territorial maps, looked at the Alpha King of Ironholt for 3 full seconds. She did not speak. She did not cry. She inclined her head, not a bow, not submission, just the quiet acknowledgement of a woman who had heard what was said and found it insufficient to break her, turned on her heel and walked out of the great hall with the kind of silence that made every wolf in the room feel, inexplicably, as though they had just lost something. The heavy oak doors closed behind her, and something inside Chaol Draven's chest, something older than thought, older than pride, older than the crown that sat like a millstone on his brow, began to howl. He crushed it. He had ruled the Northern Dominion for 217 years. He had buried a father who called love a parasite. He had survived a curse that had stripped warmth from his body so completely that frost formed on anything he touched for longer than a moment. Goblets, chair arms, the stone railing of his balcony. His bed had not been warm in 2 centuries. His skin had not known heat since the night the witch Valdara had pressed her hand to his chest and whispered, "You will feel nothing until nothing is all that remains of you." He did not need a mate bond. He did not need the pull. He certainly did not need a girl with no bloodline, no rank, and no pack worth naming, whose only qualification was that his wolf had gone violently, catastrophically still the moment she stepped into the hall, and then had surged forward with a recognition so savage it had nearly dropped him to his knees in front of his entire court. Mine. No, not his, not hers, not anyone's. He was the Alpha King, and he chose with his mind, not his blood. The rejection was the right decision. He was sure of it. He told himself this for the next 6 hours while the feast continued around him, and he touched nothing, tasted nothing, and felt the frost creeping further up his fingers than it had in decades. By the time the last torch guttered in the great hall, and his court had stumbled to their chambers drunk on mead and gossip, Chaol stood alone on the dais with his claws he had not called, buried in the arm of the wolf throne. His beta, Torren, stood at the foot of the steps with his arms crossed, and the particular expression of a man who had served his king long enough to know when silence was more dangerous than speech. "Don't," Chaol said. "I haven't said anything." "Your face is saying it." Torren exhaled through his nose. "She was given a room in the East Tower. Lady Morgaine wanted her removed from the fortress entirely, but I overruled it. The eastern passes are not safe at night, and sending a lone woman into them would be. I don't care where she sleeps." The lie landed between them like a stone thrown into still water. Torren looked at his king. Chaol looked at the frost spreading across the carved wood beneath his fingers. The bond doesn't care what you decided, Torrin said quietly. You know that. Leave. Torrin left. Cale stood in the empty hall and listened to the silence, and tried not to think about the way she had looked at him in those 3 seconds before she turned away. Not with hatred, not with heartbreak. With something worse. Understanding. As if she had already known what he would do before he did it. As if she had walked into this hall expecting exactly this, and had made her peace with it before the first word left his mouth. That look had undone something in him that the rejection itself had not. Because a woman who fought the severance, who wept, who raged, who begged, that woman still believed the bond mattered, still believed he might change his mind. Serafina Voss had looked at him like a woman who had stopped expecting anything from anyone a long time ago. And his wolf could not bear it. The shift took him without permission. One moment he was standing on the dais, the Alpha King in his black ceremonial armor, his hands white-knuckled on the throne. The next he was on 4 legs, massive and dark-furred, and moving through the corridors of his own fortress like a ghost made of shadow and muscle and fury he could not name. He did not decide to go to the East Tower. His wolf decided for him. The corridor was dark and cold. Everything in Ironholt was cold, had been cold since the curse settled into the stone like a second winter that never lifted. His claws clicked against the flagstones. His breath came in low, steady pulls, drawing in the scent of the fortress. Iron, old smoke, pine resin, the lingering musk of 300 wolves who had feasted in his hall. And beneath all of it, threading through the cold like a vein of warmth in frozen earth, her. She smelled like hearthfire and wild sage and something sweet beneath it, something his wolf had no name for except necessary. He found her door, a plain oak thing at the end of a narrow corridor, given to her because it was the smallest room in the tower, the one reserved for guests who were not meant to stay. He lay down in front of it. His massive body curled against the stone, his head resting on his forepaws, his golden eyes fixed on the narrow gap beneath the door where thin candlelight flickered. He could hear her breathing inside. Steady. Too steady. The kind of controlled breathing a person learns when crying is not safe, when making any sound at all might invite something worse through the door. She was not crying, but she was holding herself together with the kind of discipline that spoke of long practice. Cale's wolf pressed his nose to the gap beneath the door and breathed in, and the sound that came from his chest was not a growl, it was a whine. Low, involuntary, aching, the sound of an animal that does not understand why it hurts. Inside the room, the breathing stopped. Silence. Then, very quietly, the sound of bare feet crossing stone. The candlelight shifted as her shadow moved across the gap. He heard her stop on the other side of the door. Heard her heartbeat. Faster than her breathing had suggested, which meant the steadiness had been a mask. Which meant she was more afraid than she had let anyone see. Which meant... His wolf whined again. "I know what you are," she said through the door. Her voice was low and even, and carried the particular composure of someone who had decided that fear was a luxury she could not afford. "And I know you don't want to be here. Your king made his decision. You should respect it, even if you can't understand it." She was talking to his wolf as if it were a separate creature, as if the man who had rejected her and the beast lying outside her door were 2 different beings. She was not entirely wrong. "Go back to your hall," she said. "I will leave at first light. You will not have to—" She stopped. He heard her swallow. "You will not have to do this again." If you're enjoying this story, a like goes a long way. It tells me this is the kind of tale you want more of. Cale pressed his body harder against the door. The wood creaked. Frost should have spread across it at his touch. It spread across everything he touched. But the oak remained bare, dry, unfrozen. For the first time in 200 years, something he touched did not turn to ice. He stayed there until dawn. She did not open the door. When the first grey light crept through the arrow-slit windows of the East Tower, Cale shifted back to his human form in the corridor, crouched and breathing hard and sick with a feeling he could not name. His hands were shaking. His hands never shook. He had held a sword through a 7-hour siege without tremor, had signed execution orders with steady fingers, had endured the curse's worst nights, the ones where the cold reached so deep it felt like his heart was freezing solid, without flinching. His hands were shaking now. He returned to his chambers before anyone could see him. He dressed. He sat in the chair by his frost-covered window and stared at the grey morning, and told himself, again, that the rejection was right. The door to his chamber opened without a knock. Only 2 people in Ironholt would dare, and one of them was Torrin, who had sense enough to knock regardless. Lady Morgaine did not have sense. Lady Morgaine had ambition. She should be gone by midday, Morgaine said, settling into the chair across from him without invitation. Her silver hair was immaculate, her pale eyes bright with satisfaction she did not bother to disguise. I have arranged an escort to the southern border. One of the lesser packs will take her in. Or not. Either way, she will no longer be a complication. Who authorized an escort? I did. As senior advisor to the Crown, I have standing authority to cancel it. The satisfaction in Morgaine's eyes flickered. My king? She stays. You rejected her publicly, before the entire court. The severance was spoken. If she remains in this fortress, it sends a message that she stays, Morgaine. His voice did not rise. It dropped. It dropped to the register that made wolves with 10 times Morgaine's rank lower their eyes and bare their throats, the register that carried the weight of 2 centuries of absolute rule and the kind of power that did not need volume because it had gravity. Morgaine's jaw tightened. Her fingers curled around the arms of the chair. The bond is severed, she said carefully. Whatever you felt, get out. She left. But the look she cast over her shoulder as she closed the door was not the look of a woman who had been overruled. It was the look of a woman recalculating. Cale stared at his hands. The frost was already reforming across his knuckles, the cold seeping back in like a tide that had briefly, impossibly, retreated. She stays. He did not know why he had said it. The rejection was right. The rejection was necessary. She was no one, an orphan raised in a border pack, brought to the gathering of eligible females only because her pack alpha owed a debt, and she was the payment. She had no training, no lineage, no political value. Choosing her would have weakened every alliance he had spent 2 centuries building. And yet, his wolf had not spoken to him since the rejection. Not a growl, not a push of instinct, not the low rumble of opinion that had been his constant companion since he first shifted at 14 years old. The beast inside him had gone silent in a way that felt less like obedience and more like grief. And his hands had not shaken since the curse began, and the door had not frozen. He went to her, not as the wolf this time, as the king. He walked through his own corridors in the early morning light, past servants who pressed themselves against the walls and guards who snapped to attention, and he knocked on the plain oak door at the end of the East Tower corridor. She opened it. She was dressed in the same gown from the night before, creased from sleep she probably had not gotten. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders. Her eyes, brown, steady, deep enough to drown in, met his without flinching, without deference, without the submission that every other wolf in this fortress offered him as reflexively as breathing. I was told I'm leaving at midday, she said. You're not. Then what am I doing? He did not have an answer. He was the Alpha King of the Northern Dominion. He had an answer for everything, for territorial disputes and blood feuds and curse-born winters that would not end. He had answered every challenge, every crisis, every impossible question that 2 centuries of rule had thrown at him. He did not have an answer for her. Your door, he said. Last night. It didn't freeze. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. as if she had noticed too and had been turning it over in her mind all night. "I know," she said. "Everything I touch freezes. Stone, wood, metal, skin. It has for 200 years. Everything. Except that door. Except." He stopped. His jaw worked. The admission that was forming in his throat felt like swallowing broken glass. "Except when your wolf was lying against it," she finished for him, quietly, without triumph or accusation or pity. Just the truth, offered back to him like a mirror held steady. He stared at her. The frost on his knuckles was retreating. He could feel it. Warmth, actual warmth, spreading from his fingertips upward, tentative and terrifying, like blood returning to a limb that had been numb so long he had forgotten it was part of his body. "I rejected you," he said. "Yes, in front of 300 wolves. I was there. And you're still standing here looking at me like—" He stopped again. His voice had done something it had not done in 2 centuries. It had cracked. "Like what?" she asked. "Like I matter to you, after what I did. You should hate me. You should—" "I don't have the luxury of hating people who have power over me," she said. "I never have. What I feel about what you did is my business, and I will carry it quietly, the way I have carried everything else. But I will not pretend it didn't happen, and I will not perform forgiveness to make you comfortable." The words landed in his chest like arrows finding the gaps in armor. Not because they were cruel, because they were honest. Because no one in 217 years of absolute rule had spoken to him with that kind of unadorned, unflinching truth. "Morgaine wants you gone," he said. "Morgaine wanted me gone before I arrived. She had the noble daughters lined up like horses at auction. My presence disrupted her plans." "You know this how?" "Because I have been the inconvenient woman in powerful rooms before, Your Majesty. The signs are not subtle." He almost smiled. It would have been the first time in longer than he could remember. "Stay," he said. Not a command. A request. And both of them knew the difference. "Why?" "Because my wolf will not leave your door. And I have not felt warmth in 200 years, and I do not understand any of it, and—" He exhaled. The breath came out visible in the cold corridor air, but less so than usual. Less frost. Less winter. And because I think I may have made the worst mistake of my very long life in that hall last night, and I do not know how to fix it, but I know it starts with you not walking out of my gates at midday." Seraphina studied him. The Alpha King of the Northern Dominion, standing in a narrow corridor outside the smallest room in the East Tower, asking a woman with no name and no rank and no pack to stay in a fortress made of ice because she was the only warm thing he had touched in 2 centuries. "I will stay," she said. "But I am not your mate, Chaol Draven. You made certain of that last night. If you want to undo what you did, you will have to earn it. And earning it means telling me the truth. All of it. Starting with the curse." His wolf stirred for the first time since the rejection. Not a howl, not a surge. A breath. The quietest possible sign of something that was not yet hope, but was no longer silence. "Tonight," he said, "the North Tower. There is a room where—" He hesitated. "Where I go when the cold is worst. No one else knows about it. I will tell you everything." She nodded once, then she closed the door. He stood in the corridor and looked down at his hands. The frost was gone from his fingers entirely. His skin was warm. Not hot, not burning. Just the simple, ordinary warmth of a living body. The kind of warmth every other creature in the world took for granted, and he had not felt since he was a young man standing in a room with a witch who wanted to watch a king freeze from the inside out. That night, in the hidden room at the top of the North Tower, a room he had never shown anyone, a room where the walls were scratched with claw marks from the nights the cold drove him to shift and pace like a caged thing. He told her. He told her about Valdara, about the curse that was not punishment but payment. His father had bargained with the witch for military victory and offered his son's warmth as the price, and Cale had been 16 years old and had no say in it. He told her about the 200 years of frozen isolation, of watching goblets crack in his grip and seeing servants flinch from his touch and sleeping in a bed rimed with frost every morning. He told her about the wolves who had tried to be his Luna and could not withstand the cold that radiated from him. The last one had lost 3 fingers to frostbite just from holding his hand. He told her about the prophecy Morgaine had found in Valdara's journals after she died, that the curse would break only when the king could be touched without freezing, when warmth returned of its own accord, not summoned or forced but given freely by one who expected nothing in return. Morgaine found the prophecy, Seraphina said slowly, and he watched her mind work behind those steady brown eyes, and then arranged a gathering of noble daughters, eligible females from powerful bloodlines. Yes, women who expected thrones and titles and alliances, women who would touch you because of what they would receive in return. He said nothing. And then I walked in, a nobody who expected nothing, whose touch had no ambition behind it, and your wolf knew. She looked at him. And Morgaine knew too. That's why she wanted me gone before I ever reached the hall. Not because I was unworthy, because I was the answer. The room went very still. Cale felt something crack behind his ribs. Not pain, not quite, but the fracture of a wall that had been holding for 2 centuries, a wall he had built brick by brick out of cold and duty and the absolute certainty that he would die frozen and alone. She has been maintaining the curse, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. Hasn't she? She found the prophecy. She controls who gets close to you. She arranged the rejection, positioned the noble daughters, ensured the political pressure would make choosing me impossible. She did not need to maintain the curse. She just needed to make sure the cure never reached you. Why? Because a frozen king is a controllable king. A king who cannot touch, cannot feel, cannot bond. That king needs advisors, needs handlers, needs Morgaine. The candlelight flickered. The claw marks on the walls seemed to deepen in the shifting shadows, and Cale Draven, who had not wept in 200 years because his tears froze before they could fall, felt heat behind his eyes for the first time since he was a boy. You should go, he said. If Morgaine knows what you are, what you could do, she will not let you live long enough to. Seraphina reached out and took his hand. The warmth hit him like a wave breaking over a frozen shore. It rushed up his arm, across his chest, flooded through his ribs, and filled his lungs with air that was warm, actually warm, for the first time in 2 centuries. He gasped. His fingers closed around hers involuntarily, desperately, and the frost that perpetually coated his skin retreated like darkness from a lit torch. I am not going anywhere, she said. He was shaking. His whole body was shaking. Not from cold, from the absence of it. From the overwhelming, devastating, unbearable sensation of feeling something after 200 years of nothing. Seraphina. The door exploded inward. Morgaine stood in the threshold with 4 armed guards, her silver eyes blazing, her composure finally stripped away to reveal what had always been beneath it. Cold, calculating fury. Seize her, Morgaine said. She is manipulating the king through forbidden blood magic. I invoke the Elder Protocol. The king is compromised, and I assume temporary authority of— You assume nothing. Cale's voice shook the stones. Not volume. Frequency. The resonance of an alpha whose power was not political, but primal, bone deep. The kind of authority that did not ask for obedience, but compelled it, the way gravity compels falling. The guards dropped to their knees. Not by choice. Their wolves forced them down, recognizing what their human minds had not yet processed. Their alpha was standing at full power for the first time in 2 centuries. and the cold that had muted him, dampened him, kept him functioning at half his strength for 200 years, was gone. Morgaine did not kneel, but her face went white. "You found Valdara's prophecy," Cale said, advancing on her, and with each step the frost on the floor melted beneath his feet, leaving wet stone, leaving warmth. "You found it, and you buried it. You curated every woman who came near me, ensured they were ambitious, political, transactional. You knew the curse would hold as long as no one touched me with genuine warmth. And when the bond chose someone who might actually break it, you engineered a rejection. Everything I did was for the stability of this pack. Everything you did was for the stability of your power." He stopped in front of her. The warmth radiating from his body was visible now, steam rising from his skin in the cold air of the tower, the frozen moisture on the walls beginning to weep and run. 200 years, Morgaine. 200 years of cold, of isolation, of believing I was unfixable. And you had the answer in your hands the entire time. Morgaine's composure shattered. "You are a fool if you think a bond with a packless orphan will hold this kingdom together. The Northern Lords will revolt. The alliances, the Northern Lords follow strength. And I have never been stronger than I am in this moment." He turned to the kneeling guards. "Take Lady Morgaine to the cells below the keep. She will answer to a tribunal for treason against the crown and 2 centuries of conspiracy against the Alpha Bond." The guards moved. Morgaine fought. Screamed, actually, a sound so unlike her careful composure that it echoed through the tower like a crack splitting ice. But they held her, and they took her, and the door closed behind them. Silence. Cale stood in the middle of the room, steam still curling from his skin, his chest heaving, his hands, warm, impossibly warm, hanging at his sides. The claw marks on the walls glistened with meltwater. The candle burned brighter than it had any right to. He turned to Seraphina. She was standing exactly where she had been, her hand still extended where his had released it, her eyes bright but her jaw set. And she looked at him not like a woman who had just watched a king reclaim his power, but like a woman who was still deciding whether that king was worth the trouble. "You rejected me in front of 300 wolves," she said. "I know. You will undo it in front of 300 wolves. Yes. And you will never, ever let someone else decide who belongs at your side. Not Morgaine, not your court, not your politics. No." She studied him for one more moment. Then she crossed the distance between them, took his face in both hands, and kissed him. The warmth that had been spreading through the fortress in tendrils and trickles became a flood. It poured through the stone walls and iron fixtures and frozen corridors of Ironholt like spring breaking through a winter that had lasted lifetimes. Somewhere, deep in the keep, a frozen fountain cracked and began to flow. In the courtyard, frost fell from the battlements in sheets, revealing stone that had not seen bare air in 2 centuries. And Cale Draven kissed her back with the desperate, trembling hunger of a man who had been starving for so long he had forgotten what food tasted like. And when he pulled back, his eyes were gold and bright and wet, and his voice broke on her name like a wave breaking on a shore it had been trying to reach for 200 years. "Stay," he said again. But this time it was not a request. It was a vow. 3 months later, the gardens of Ironholt bloomed for the first time in living memory. The court had changed. Not overnight. Nothing real changes overnight. But steadily, unmistakably, the way a frozen river thaws from the center outward. The halls that had been perpetually cold now held warmth. Fires burned higher. Wolves laughed louder. The servants no longer flinched. Cale had stood before those same 300 wolves and spoken the words of bonding, not severance, with a voice that did not waver and eyes that never left hers. He placed the luna's circlet on her head himself, a crown of dark silver and amber that had been forged new because the old one had been Morgaine's selection, and he would not give Seraphina anything that carried that woman's fingerprints. Morgaine's tribunal had been swift. 2 centuries of conspiracy, exposed through journals and correspondence found in her private chambers. She had not cast the curse, that had been Valdara, and Valdara was long dead, but she had ensured it endured, had manipulated every aspect of the king's isolation to maintain her grip on the throne's shadow. She was exiled to the far eastern reaches, stripped of rank, her name struck from the court records. Seraphina governed beside him with the same steady composure that had carried her through a public rejection without a single tear. She was not loud, she was not dramatic. She simply stood where she stood and spoke truth in rooms full of wolves who had spent centuries trading in careful lies. And one by one, they began to follow her. Not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. On a warm afternoon, warm, genuinely warm, the kind of afternoon that would have been impossible 3 months ago, a letter arrived from the border pack that had sent Seraphina to the gathering as payment for a debt. The pack Alpha's handwriting was shaky, the words were carefully chosen and poorly spelled and dripping with the particular desperation of a man who had just realized that the woman he had treated as worthless was now the most powerful Luna on the continent. Kale found Seraphina reading it in the garden, sitting on a stone bench surrounded by wildflowers that had pushed through soil that had been frozen solid for 2 centuries. "What does it say?" he asked. She folded the letter and looked up at him. The sunlight caught her hair, and his wolf, settled now, quiet, with a contentment that still stunned him every morning when he woke warm beside her, pressed against his chest, with something that felt like peace. "It says he's sorry," she said. "Are you going to respond?" She considered this. Then she tucked the letter into her pocket and took his hand, warm against warm, skin against skin, simple and devastating in its ordinariness, and smiled. "No," she said. "I have better things to do." So, where are you listening from tonight? Tell me in the comments. And if this story hit you the way it hit me writing it, share what moments stayed with you longest. If you haven't subscribed yet, come join the pack. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.